Good morning, or good afternoon, depending on what time of day you're watching the show. Uh, and welcome to Issues That Matter. And when I reflect upon progress these days, I look at the medical community and medical science, and they have done a fabulous job at extending life. The unfortunate part is that with that extension of life comes a plethora of challenges that people face that in the past they might not have had to face because they didn't live that long. But now we have people living to their 90s, in some cases 100 years old, and that opens up additional challenges. One of the challenges has to do with law, and it has created a boom, you might say, in the matter of elder law. Our guest today, is attorney Martin Womer. He's the founder, president, and managing attorney of the Maine Center for Elder Law. Marty, pleasure meeting you.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
How long have you been involved with elder law?
Well, I committed myself to focusing in it in 2002. I had actually gone to law school in my early 40s. I started out as a chemist. I was a research chemist at a company up in Rockland, and I'm 62 now. I just had my 40th college reunion last weekend at Colby. Anyway, I started out as a chemist, and through a series of things ended up founding a conservation land trust because I was very interested in conservation. And then a few years after helping to found that, became the initial staff person. And that convinced me to go to law school. And so in 1994, I started law school at University of Maine School of Law at age 41. And I graduated 3 years later. So it's a three-year program. And then I was going to concentrate in conservation law, working with nonprofit corporations on their compliance with nonprofit law, and tax exemption and that sort of thing, and charitable giving. Well, that was the plan, and as it turned out, in January of 1999, my dad died. He had a heart attack and died, and my mother was developing dementia, and he had been taking care of her to such a degree that we all really weren't that aware of it. When we got together for holidays and that sort of thing, it wasn't so apparent. And part of that was he was doing all the driving, and he was really racing around and doing things. And but once she was on her own, she was getting lost in her car and tearing off rear view mirrors on wherever, we don't know, things like that. And I had grown up down in southern Connecticut, so I decided after my dad died that I would move down there, and I'd be there for my 30th high school reunion in 2001. So in 1999, I moved down to Connecticut and took care of my mother for a few years. She died in 2001, and then I settled her estate, and I really couldn't afford to stay there anymore. I had been in Maine really since I came to Maine in '71 for college. And but that experience of working with her, and also, as it turned out, working with a lot of other people in her generation, because people were referred to me, knowing my mother, knowing my parents, and just even high school friends were referring their mothers to me and that sort of thing. So by the time I left there and came back to Maine, I had mostly seniors for my clients, and I mean people in their 80s primarily. Yep. And I did have a few classmates, so they were 50-ish, 50-something, but the bulk of my clientele was already seniors without me going out and trying to find them. So I decided I had taken a number of courses in elder law, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, what that is. But when I came back to Maine, I decided I would concentrate as an elder law specialist. And that's what I've done. So that was the summer of 2002. And now, 13 years later, I'm actually a leader in the field nationally. I don't mean to pat myself on the back too much, but I teach courses all around the country.
Well,
And
experience tells me that if you don't pat yourself on the back, it may be a long time before somebody does pat you on the back.
right, that could very well
So
be.
I spend a lot of time.
Yeah. So anyway, so I've been concentrating in elder law for 13 years and had done a fair amount of it before that, but during the previous 2 or 3 years while I was taking care of my mom.
In listening to you, not only is what you do in elder law a vocation, based on your experience, life's experiences, it's equally an avocation.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
You do it because it needs to be done and you love doing it.
Yeah, it's a great field to be in, and of course I had gone to law school to pursue charitable work really, and so I never was really focused on, for example, litigation or any of those kinds of things, or doing corporate transactions and that kind of thing that I might have had to do for a period of time had I started out as a 25-year-old graduating from law school. Graduating at 44, I had a different perspective, and I had gone for a purpose to focus in a certain area. That shifted, but a lot of what I studied in law school and had already been working on is really still applicable, and that is I did a lot of elective work in estate planning and tax law and things like that while I was in law school, and as well as other things that were more directly related to environmental matters and things like that. And so I am able to apply virtually all of that information that I would have been using in a different way had I not focused in elder law. But I'm really glad to do it. And one colleague of mine describes elder law attorneys as social workers with a law degree, and it is kind of a hybrid that way. We're working with families that are at best planning ahead for end of life issues and long-term care and things like that, but very often we're actually dealing with families in crisis and that have learned, for example, that their spouse or mother or somebody is not going to be able to go home after rehab, after having a hospitalization and then rehab and then being discharged, and the system is not in place for them to be able to go home. And maybe the house is not safe for that either. And the cost of taking care of someone 24/7 at home is actually more than the cost of being in a nursing home, even though nursing homes are now in the area of $8,000 to $10,000 or $11,000 a month. But if you've got someone you're hiring to be in the home at, say, $25 an hour full time, that adds up to more than those kinds of numbers.
Yes.
And you still got to pay for the home. You still got to pay your property taxes and your heat and your groceries and all that. So
It's frightening.
So it's an expensive operation. And so what we do is we work with people on planning, and we do a number of different things. Some of it is making sure they have estate planning in place. And the key things for estate plans that all of us should have are a will. We should all have a last will and testament. We should all have a durable power of attorney. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those are.
Please do.
But the power of attorney enables someone else to do financial transactions for you. And usually that means that we can avoid having to get someone appointed by the court who's called a conservator. That's a huge savings in money in terms of cost and just in terms of the complexity of reporting to the court. And one thing that, for example, that always throws people is if they are appointed as conservator, and then the protected person, is what the term is called now instead of the ward, the protected person dies, well, you have to close the conservatorship. And until you close the conservatorship, you have to keep on paying the probate bond, which is insurance, and it might be $600 or $800 a year. And sometimes people think, oh my gosh, my person I'm taking care of has died, and that they're done. But they've got another whole process. They have to do a final accounting since the last accounting that they did, which has to balance to the penny, and they have to get that done and close that, get the court to release the conservator or terminate the conservatorship, and then the bond can be terminated. And right now, just this week, we've actually had to assist a conservator in renewing the bond, even though her father died last October, and we've been working on her final accounting, and for whatever reason, accountings had not been done along the way, so we're catching up on this a little bit. But the court in York County Probate Court is really backed up right now. I'm not exactly sure why that is, if it's understaffing or exactly what, but they're scheduling hearings in December at this point. And now if you have an emergency, I'm sure we can get in to deal with an emergency conservatorship, for example, if someone is suddenly without any support and needs to have a conservatorship. We can usually do a conservatorship very quickly, but that can only go for 6 months. That's called a temporary conservatorship. And then you have to get a longer term or regular conservatorship in place. But for non-emergency cases, hearings are being scheduled in December at this point.
For a short while, I was affiliated with an organization that dealt with Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was explained to me, and I won't say I witnessed it because fortunately I was never involved in a situation I was never involved in a individual situation. I was more broadly overview. Mm-hmm. But it was explained to me that we have a ticking time bomb relative to Alzheimer's, and that we're going to have a lot of people that need care, and we don't have the beds in the facilities
Right.
to provide it.
That's true. And the demographics are like the silver tsunami. Someone was describing it as the other day, and said to me that I am surfing the silver tsunami. That was what I was described to me at my college reunion last weekend. And the demographics are massive. There are 10,000 people a day turning 65 for the next 15 or 16 years. That's the baby boom. And so it's a huge population on top of the existing World War II, mm-hmm. Korean War period generations. And so we've got just a massive need. And of course, that's why we see a lot of assisted living facilities, and there, more are being built and that sort of thing too. But not everybody can afford to go and live someplace that costs $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month on a long-term basis, and that'll wipe out their
and I would venture to say
savings
that
pretty quickly.
Since 2008, when we had our financial crisis, mm-hmm. There's a significant segment of the population that have yet to recover from that.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and real estate values have not recovered much, and yes, it's a little less slow than it was a couple of years ago, but it really hasn't recovered or gotten back onto an upward slope. And maybe we peaked out, and I don't want to get grim about the real estate market, but a lot of people have lost a lot of their equity
Yep.
So actually, one of the things we were talking about in preparation for the meeting was people accessing their equity in their home by way of a reverse mortgage. And I just want to mention that as a topic. And I do hope you'll talk with Sharon Eastman from Big Horizon Mortgage Company at some point, because she's really very knowledgeable in this field. And although people are concerned about doing reverse mortgages, and let me just tell what that is. That's a mortgage on the home, but you don't have to pay the mortgage payments every month. You do have to pay your property taxes and your insurance, because those are variable amounts that you're responsible for. But you don't have to pay the principal and interest. And so the interest is accumulating. And as you have there are two ways these are set up in the big picture. One is you get a lump sum at the time when you apply, or when you close on the mortgage. The other is you establish a line of credit, and you're essentially drawing off equity as you need it. That's really the better arrangement, I think, because that way you're not tapping into the equity of the home.
That second arrangement that you mentioned sounds very similar to a home equity loan.
It is. It's very much like a home equity loan, where you just don't have to pay either the principal or the interest. Now, a lot of home equity loans are interest only for a period of time, so you don't have to be paying the principal of what you've borrowed in that case. But yeah, they're very analogous. It's just that you don't have to pay the principal interest. And then when the last person who is an owner and over age 62, or maybe it's 62 and over, but anyway, 62 is the threshold. You have to have people who are 62 in order to get a government guaranteed home equity loan. Reverse mortgage. But when the last one of those people vacates, either by dying or moving to a nursing home, the loan becomes due 1 year after the person vacates. So now if the person dies, say it was a sole owner and the person dies, then the foreclosure process is going to start sooner. But if the person just, say, moves to a nursing home, then there's a year of time. And really the best thing to do would be to put the house on the market, or if it's a family home that is going to be kept, and say the son or daughter is going to live there, then that really a transaction should be structured where that person goes out and gets a conventional mortgage and buys the property and then pays off the reverse mortgage.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, that would be something that they would go to a person such as yourself, and also to a person such as
Sharon Eastman, exactly.
Sharon Eastman.
Yeah, and now I don't mean to be doing advertising for Sharon, but she is great, and I have refinanced my own home with her, so she does conventional mortgages as well, and home equity loans as well as reverse mortgages, but she's very knowledgeable in reverse mortgages and a real resource for this area. Anyway, and she's based in Kennebunk in the Lower Village. But we interact a lot with other professionals throughout the area. And I want to mention that my firm has 2 offices. We're based in Kennebunk on Route 1 at Webb Hannett Place. But we also have a kind of satellite office up in Portland, because my partner, Barbara Schlishman, lives on Peaks Island. And so she commutes to the mainland. And rather than commuting all the way to Kennebunk every day, which is a long way after taking the ferry to the mainland, we got her an office in a suite in what's called Monument Way, 1 Monument Way. And it's the same suite where Maine Community Foundation is located, which is a wonderful organization. And there are about, 20 or something law firms from other areas that have their Portland satellite office there in that same suite.
Well, what you just said, it's nice being a lengthy resident of Kennebunk. Kennebunk has its own feelings about whether that's good or bad. But in any event, being a long-term resident of Kennebunk, it's nice to see your base is in Kennebunk with a satellite in Portland. All so often, the
That's
base
true.
is in Portland with a satellite in Kennebunk.
Right, yeah. And how I ended up with my firm in Portland, or in Kennebunk, is that I ended up joining another law firm in Kennebunk in 2004 and decided in 2007 to form this firm, Maine Center for Elder Law, as what in the law field would be called a boutique firm that is really concentrating in a narrow area. We're not trying to be a full-service law firm that does all things for everybody. It's all estate planning, working with seniors and their long-term care issues, probating estates, guardianships and conservatorships to the extent that those are needed, and special needs planning. And that's really a adjunct to an elder law practice, because we do a lot of planning where, say, spouses have wills, and the wills are set up so that if one of them dies, that person's share of assets goes into a special needs trust for the surviving spouse. And that way, the assets in the special needs trust won't have to be spent down before the individual can get Maine care, if that's where things go. And sometimes, for example, the basic strategy, if we have a crisis case and it's a married couple, we will have the assets of the person who's going to be the institutionalized spouse, that is the person in the nursing home, those assets will be moved into the name of the community spouse, the spouse who's at home, and then that spouse, the community spouse, does a new will with a special needs trust for the institutionalized spouse. So if the community spouse who has all the assets now happens to die first, the assets will go into the special needs trust for the community spouse. They won't have to be spent down in order for the person to be on Maine care, but they'll be there to supplement governmental benefits. And that's what special needs trusts are about. They're a way of putting assets aside and being able to not have those assets disqualify the person from governmental benefits. Because we do this for seniors, it's also appropriate to be doing this for other people who are not seniors. So we do a fair amount of special needs planning for disabled children, and sometimes it's for people who are getting a settlement or a judgment from a personal injury case or from a medical malpractice case or something like that. And there we do a different kind of special needs trust, because it's what's called a self-settled special needs trust. We're protecting the assets that are already owned by or coming to the disabled person who may have been disabled by the injury that that the lawsuit's about. But it could be that the benefit is coming for some other reason. Like sometimes people just simply inherit money from a relative, like a grandparent, and the grandparent's estate plan didn't take into consideration that if the disabled person, say disabled grandchild, receives a bunch of assets, that child's going to go off of their benefits until they've spent down the inheritance, and then they'll go back onto their program, but the inheritance will have been consumed in the meantime. So that means it's not going to be there for the rest of the person's life to take care of things that are not covered by Maine care. And there's a lot of things that are not covered by Maine care. Clothing, for example, is not provided by Maine care. And if someone is, for example, a disabled person who is able to move around and get to go to things and is, disability is, there's such a huge range. People can be disabled physically, they can be disabled mentally, or any combination.
Yep.
So someone may be disabled, but perfectly functional in terms of being able to go on a vacation or to enjoy working on a computer or something like that. I have a colleague in Atlanta who is someone who you would just assume was on disability and was unable to work because he has cerebral palsy and it's really advanced. But he is a high-functioning person. He's an elder law attorney and disability attorney, and he is a wonderful resource. Meeting him in person, you'd be astonished that he can do anything. But in fact, he's great, and you wouldn't know that he was not completely fine when you're communicating by email, for example. And he's very active in an elder law listserv that I'm participating in. So, it's an interesting field.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible example, because I'm on disability, multiple sclerosis, and when I hear about something like that, I have this feeling about giving myself a good swift kick.
Well, if you earn too much on this, if you're, for example, on Social Security disability or SSI for that matter, then you'll be disqualified because you've earned too much, and that means that you are, according to the criteria for Social Security disability, you're not disabled because you're earning too much. And in this particular case, my colleague could, if he didn't want to work, no one would hold it against him. He is greatly disabled physically, but it's really hard to talk with him and that sort of thing. In person, it's really hard to understand what he's saying. But he is a brilliant attorney, and boy, is he a good advocate for disabled people. He's great.
Well, that's something that he and I share. Because my involvement with the MS Society has me being an advocate for for disabled people. We're in the process of trying to get a law passed to give tax breaks, tax credits to disabled people for modifications made to their home.
Good idea.
For safety and accessibility reasons.
Yep.
So in that regard, plus the fact we both have specific challenges in front of us, that gentleman and myself do share some commonalities.
Yeah.
I would love to have a commonality. One of those commonalities be that I'm in a very productive money-making mode. But you point out the restriction on earnings.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned that you're on disability, because I wouldn't have known that. And I've had several situations where I've met with families and we'll have an initial consultation. We charge what we call a fixed price for initial consultation. So if they go on and on, we're not running up a huge tab. And so now we try to keep it to about an hour and a half to 2 hours, but I often go longer than that just because I'm enthusiastic, I guess. And I want to make sure people have a really good grounding in what it is we're talking about. So it's not uncommon to have a meeting with the family. And this is kind of also one thing about elder law, which is a little different from most other fields of law, is it's very family oriented. So we have to be a little flexible compared to other attorneys in terms of who is the client.